everybody, here we are coming to the end of the semester. We're in Unit 5. In this video, we're primarily going to be looking at the 20th century, a little bit into the 21st century. There's no single narrative or an easy way to tell the story of women's history in this century. Okay, some Christian women gained rights while other women suffered horribly under totalitarian regimes, under horrific oppression. Okay, some women fought systems of oppression while others were part of those systems. Okay, Christianity grew explosively in some places while it contracted in others. The truth of the matter is today, it's now much more likely for, say, a Nigerian woman or Korean woman to go to church on Sunday morning than a French woman or a German woman. Okay, the Christianity and the demographics have changed significantly. Okay, and that's going to change the conversation. All right, if you remember back to History 1, if you've taken it, you'll remember how diverse the Christian church was in the beginning. All right, and they kind of got cornered in Europe, North America, then after a while, and things are moving back to be global again. All right. We don't want Christianity just cornered in Europe and North America. These are positive trends. Okay. So I have broken down this unit or these videos into 4 general themes that I've kind of seen through women's history in the 20th century. Okay. And those are general trends in religion. All right. The major shifts that we're seeing. Okay. A century of strife. All right, the wars, the genocides, the intentional violence against women. Okay, this is much too big. It's sadly more of a story than it should be. Okay, a century of hope. This is kind of a continuation of the reform movement. So that really took off in the 19th century that we looked at earlier in the semester. Okay, specifically, I'm going to be focused on a couple grassroots peace movements. Okay. And then a century of advancement. Here we'll talk about women gaining political rights, rights within church bodies, ordination, women's entrance into the academy, the development of different types of feminist theologies. Okay, so these are kind of the 4 themes. All right. I address each of these videos. I do have some external videos that I added to Moodle to kind of add to these conversations. Okay. Now, first off, general trends in global religion. Here, I'm actually going to share my screen now, if I can. Okay. First one I want to talk a little bit about is the decline in Christianity in the United States. Okay. I have all of these. I'm going to have 4 different websites up, and I have them all on Moodle. I put them on a page. You'll see the label, and you can look at them in more detail. All 4 articles are pretty interesting. It's from Pew. And here you can see just the decline, all right? In 2007, you've got 78% of Americans, saying they're Christian. Now it's 65%, while you have the unaffiliated growing. Okay, we know this. We've seen this so many times over. Okay, we've seen these before. All right. But it's kind of interesting. We talk a little less about Europe, or maybe we just say, well, Europe is hardly Christian anymore. Europe's actually kind of interesting and a little complicated, all right? In Western Europe, all right, so this is specifically Western Europe, 91% of the population is baptized, 81% was actually raised Christian, and 71% considers themselves Christian today. However, 22% actually attend church services on any sort of regular basis. Okay, so it's a little bit more complicated of a picture than just say, okay, Christianity has completely declined in Europe. All right, and if you come later, you can see it all broken by country, which is kind of interesting. All right, and then here's some major growth. All right, there's major growth in South Korea, not in North Korea. We don't have any firm numbers on North Korea because Christianity is illegal, but we know it's a low number. But in South Korea, this is absolutely incredible. In the year 1900, 1% of the population was Christian. Now it's 29%, and it's growing. Okay, Korea sends out a number of missionaries every year. Okay, internationally. All right, and then here specifically, this map, and actually I have a closer map in a second of this, you can really look at where you see this religious adherence, all right? Africa is now 48% Christian, all right? And in some of these countries, you can see how Christian it is, all right? South America, also incredibly Christian. Other places that were kind of strongholds of Christianity, like Russia, all right? Only 16% of Russians say that religion is very important in their lives. More than 16% identify as Christian, okay? But only 16% say it's very, very important in their lives. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing this. Okay, so it should be noted that the growth and decline of Christian religious adherence is simply not just a fact of evangelism. Like, oh, if we were better at evangelizing, this would be different. It's not necessarily the case. Okay, some of this has to do with like population growth and population decline. All right, Russia's probably the best example of this. Okay, you know, the population has been declining in Russia for a very long time, which is one of the big reasons that orthodoxy is in decline globally. Where actually in some areas there's growth of orthodoxy, like in the United States, but it doesn't make up for kind of the decline of population growth in Russia. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Okay. So overall, you know, looking at the general trends, this serves as background, all right? This isn't specific to women in the 20th century. This is just general background so you can understand kind of where we're going from here. All right, so what does this look like in practice? You know, how did this happen? How did we get here? You know, we were looking at, 19th century missionaries who were being kind of successful at evangelistic methods, and then kind of things exploded, all right? So first I want to talk a little bit about China. I want to talk about a particular woman in China who was a very influential evangelist, all right? China is a really, really interesting example because Western missionaries put so much money and time into China, okay? There are so many groups that wanted to evangelize China, okay? They just flooded into the country, all right? We read an earlier article about some of this. All right. But by the 1930s, the time of foreign missionaries was coming to an end. All right. In 1937, Japan invades China. This is actually the start of the Second World War. Often we talk about it in 1939 when Germany starts invading, but actually this is really the start of the Second World War when Japan invades China. Okay, so this causes like a mass exodus out of China from all Westerners. Okay, some returned in 1945, but in 1950, the new Communist People's Republic of China forced all missionaries out. Okay, just out. All right, so Western missionaries and Westerners thought China was lost. China's never going to be Christian. We've been there forever, and less than 1% of the population is Christian. But it was after actually all the Westerners left that Christianity really started growing. Okay. Christianity continued to grow through the years. This is under the Maoist regime. This is during the Cultural Revolution, okay, where it was illegal, where it was very, very hostile, okay. And from hindsight now, we can see how it was Chinese Christians who embraced Christianity and cultivated Christianity during these years, okay. And this is how the church grew kind of through these, very, very difficult years in China, okay. Now, you will remember that the number, like the total percentage number of Christians in China is still modest. But when you recognize that China has 1.4 billion people living in it, 3% of the population equals a lot of people, okay? So this group This growth has everything to do with Chinese Christians spreading the faith after Westerners were expelled, okay? But you can already see this happening before Westerners left in 1937, okay? The seeds of this movement were already present, and one of the best known kind of first generation Chinese evangelists, regardless of gender, was a woman by the name of Yu Sidu, okay? She's better known as Dora Yu in the West. She was born in 1873 in an American Presbyterian mission compound about 120 miles away from Shanghai. Her father was a physician. He had actually survived the Taiping Rebellion. I had a video about that up earlier. If you didn't watch it, that's okay. It was the deadliest civil war of all time, okay? And he basically survived because his surgical skills were very needed. And afterwards, he decided to become a preacher, okay? So he converts. And then Yu, following in her father's footsteps, also trains to be a medical doctor, and also kind of trains to be an evangelist. Okay, so she becomes a doctor in 1896. She decided she didn't want to get married, which would have been kind of expected for her, and she becomes a missionary to Korea, actually. So she's there from 1897. 1897 to 1903. They were very, very difficult years for her. She was kind of sick while she did it. And she eventually comes home and starts kind of this job of becoming a traveling evangelist in China, okay? By 1908, she was speaking throughout Eastern China. She was working at the YMCA, several different missionary societies, and a number of semi-autonomous Chinese evangelists, okay? Her preaching drew incredibly large crowds. She opened up her own Bible school and prayer house. Many of her early students were women that would go on to be preachers in China. She was respected both within China and also internationally. Okay, she was in 1927. She was invited, and she attended, being one of the main speakers at the Keswick Convention, okay, which was kind of a big deal at the time. She died 4 years later at the age of 58 of cancer. Now, in another context, you might seem more like just like any other woman preacher, like I talked about in the evangelist videos a few weeks ago. All right. But she was really groundbreaking in many ways. By all accounts, she was one of the foremost evangelists in China in the early 20th century. Due to her work in Korea, she's often credited as being the first cross-cultural missionary in modern times. Okay. And she was the first Chinese woman to establish a Bible school. Okay. And then among her many converts was Watchman Nee, who's very, very well known. He converted kind of after seeing her, and she mentored him as well. Okay. So I have a picture of her up on the screen. It's the only picture I could find. It's a little blurry, but you get an idea of what she looked like. Okay. And then also in China, or close by, I want to talk about this fascinating story of the Anglican Communion's first ordained woman, okay? So this is a really, really interesting incident from the first half of the 20th century. By and large, the big ordination movement happened in the second half of the 20th, but this is kind of an irregular ordination during the Second World War. Okay, so up on the screen here, I have Florence Lee Tim Oy. She was born in 1907. She was born in Hong Kong, and she was ordained 50 years before the Church of England officially began ordaining women. Okay, so in college, she joined the Anglican Church. And then after that, she began her studies at Union Theological College in Canton in 1934. All right, so she's in seminary when the Japanese invade in 1937. So she is at the time the chairman of the student union. So she takes on all these like fundraising, first aid training to kind of help in the war effort. Okay, she finishes her theological training amongst sirens and bombings. All right. After her graduation in 1938, she was sent to Hong Kong, and then in 1940, she was moved to this Portuguese colony of Macau to serve the growing Chinese refugee population on this island, okay? The next year, she's ordained a deaconess, all right, because the Anglicans had deaconesses. And in this role, she could do a lot of stuff. She could baptize, she could officiate marriages, preach, teach, preside over funerals. She did tons of outreaches, okay, with the Chinese population there. But she could not preside over the Eucharist, okay? As the war progressed, the Japanese blockade of the island made it impossible for priests to visit, and so she was authorized to perform the Eucharist due to exceptional wartime circumstances. So on Easter Sunday, 1942, she celebrated the Eucharist for the first time. All right, so now she is completely performing all the roles that a priest would. Okay, then in 1944, she traveled through Japanese occupied territory to be ordained a priest by Raymond Hall, who was her bishop. Okay. Her ordination was not some sort of statement. It wasn't a progressive mood. It was simply a matter of practicality for the bishop. To him, to deny the people the Eucharist based on her gender was completely unacceptable. Okay. She was willing and capable, and so it was the logical move to ordain her. And so he did. All right. After the war ended, however, her ordination began to cause a lot of controversy once people realized what he had done. So she was asked to relinquish her priest license, to which she did agree. Under communist rule in China then, her history as a priest caused her a lot of problems. You know, she was forced to destroy her vestments. She was sent to be re-educated during the Chinese Cultural Revolution. And then after 30 years, she was granted permission to leave the country, and she moved to Canada in 1983. And the next year, she was reinstated a priest in the Anglican Church of Canada, actually, and she served in that role until her death 10 years later. And then in 2018, she was made a permanent part of the Episcopal Church calendar of saints. All right, I'm gonna make a part 2 of this video. All right, hold on.